What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Must start and avoid quarterbacks for week one. I'll be taking a look at some fringe starters this week and seeing who I'd want to sit and start. I do not want to go over any super obvious decisions. You need to be starting Mahomes, Lamar, Dak, Watson, Wilson, Murray. These guys at the top. Basically that top six, you're starting them every week. I don't want to have to talk about them at all. So I'm going to stick with the more difficult decisions, those guys who are right on the edge of quarterback one production. And I'm going to also go over streaming options as well in this video each week, since it's a great strategy for you guys to use. And I'm also thinking of keeping track of the results. So here's the plan. Each week, I'm going to mention 3 possible streaming options that are available in over 70% of leagues, and then I'll keep track of the points per game of these picks throughout the season, and we can look back and see how viable the strategy is this season, or I guess was this season at the end. So hopefully the goal is to be able to stream mid-range quarterback one production, but hopefully, I guess it's at least low-end quarterback one production. I guess mid-range quarterback one would be the high end. That'd be we were just phenomenal and this was exceptional value. But we're really hoping to get low-end quarterback one production. But we're going to find out. So let's start things off with today's video in the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which wide receiver led the league in fantasy points from the slot. The answer was Cooper Kupp. John Jacobs was the first one to get that one right. Today's stat. Last season, which player led all running backs in both missed tackles forced per touch and elusiveness rating? All right, let's take a look at some week one matchups. And we're going to start things off with quarterback starts, where we have Matt Ryan. You guys know I always lean towards mobile quarterbacks. If I'm ever making a decision and it's really close on 2 players, I want the one that has some rushing upside because, one, it's upside. He could run for a touchdown. They could add, 3, 4, 5 points with their legs. But Ryan is one of the exceptions, especially when he's in a game that's a potential shootout. Seahawks games can definitely be a little bit scary because Seattle does like to run the ball, and they have no problem being in a lower scoring game until the 4th and just letting Russ win it for them at the end. But I'd be surprised if the Falcons struggle to score. Seattle obviously added Adams, but they lost Clowney too, and they were already fairly mediocre against the ground game. So I don't expect Seattle to just come out here and just completely stop the Falcons. And so in my eyes, the most likely game script is that this is more back and forth. We see the Falcons start to score. It means Seattle needs to be a little bit more aggressive. They're still going to run the ball a ton, but they'll be a little bit more aggressive. They'll be able to keep pace, and we just see them scoring back and forth. So I think both teams can reach the mid to upper 20s in this game, and I wouldn't be surprised if both of them got into the 30s. Now, that's on the high end of the range of outcomes, but I think we should expect mid to upper 20s for both teams. And if that's the case, then Ryan is going to have a good game. He ranked 1st in pass attempts per game last season, 4th in yards per game, and there's no way they want to give Gurley, over 20 carries a game. Gurley is just not going to be fed the ball on the ground, and they're also not just going to start feeding Brian Hill. This team is going to pass all the time, right? And they have the weapons to produce. They have Julio and Ridley and Hurst, and of course Gurley can excel in the receiving game as well. So I expect Matt Ryan to finish, top 5 in the league in pass attempts and yards, be amongst the leaders in passing touchdowns. What we see last season, Ryan had at least 300 passing yards or multiple touchdowns in 13 out of 15 weeks. And I would expect that trend to continue this week. So if you own Matt Ryan, I would make sure you're starting him. Another quarterback that I'd make sure to start is Jared Goff. Goff takes on the Cowboys in the game with the 2nd highest total on the week, and it's another one that just has shootout written all over it. The Cowboys do have a solid defensive line, but they're pretty weak in the secondary. And so especially with Henderson a little banged up, and the Rams don't have that great of an offensive line themselves, I would expect the Rams to try to get the run game going, but ultimately when that either doesn't work or isn't overly effective, I would expect them to air the ball out. And we see what happened last season. Well, in games that couldn't get the ground game going, Goff threw the ball a ton. And he finished the season averaging over 39 pass attempts per game. Also, I would not be too worried about Goff's passing total for touchdowns from last season. He had a very low 3.5% touchdown rate, so he was fairly unlucky in terms of passing touchdowns as a whole. I would expect him to get a little bit more lucky than that this year, and so I'd expect those passing touchdown numbers to go up. And I don't really see a reason why the pass attempts would go down. Maybe they're ahead more in games this season and they lean on Akers and Henderson, but at least to start this week, it is very unlikely that the Rams jump out to like a 20-point lead, even a 2-score lead. I guess they could jump out to a 10-point lead. But I'm talking like for the majority of the game, it would be very, very surprising to me if the Rams hold a 14 to 17-point lead and they can lean on the ground game. Dallas is an exceptional offense. I expect them to finish top 3 this season in a boatload of categories. And so for them to just be completely stopped by the Rams and for the Rams to be able to run the ball and be effective in that area, that seems like a very unlikely outcome. And so I truly believe if you own Goff, you got to be starting him because I think they're going to have to be playing catch up, or at least they're going to have to keep pace with the Cowboys, and that's going to come through the air. For sits, we're going to start off with Daniel Jones. I would just not play Daniel Jones this week. If you're in a 1-quarterback league and you only took 1 quarterback, honestly, I would just try and find someone on your bench that you can get rid of and start instead of Jones. The Giants are 6-point underdogs against the Steelers this week, which is honestly probably the worst matchup you can have, playing the Steelers. The Steelers have a great defense this year, and it would be asking a lot for Jones to post a solid stat line against them. A lot of people were excited about Jones this season, especially because he showed that he's got a very high weekly ceiling last year, but those spiked weeks, they came against some of just the worst passing defenses in the league. And if you look at the 4 games where he played a top 10 passing defense, he scored 11.5, 8.2, 15.7, which is okay, and then 11.2. So I get that he has a ton of weapons, and I'm sure he's going to have even more blow-up games this season. But the Steelers are legit, and he hasn't exactly proven to be matchup proof yet, so I would just try. I know it's very difficult early in the season because people aren't on bye. There aren't that many injuries right now, so you probably don't have people that you can drop off the bench. And I know you just drafted a team that you love, and so it's very difficult to look at these sleepers on your bench and to drop them. But we kind of had Daniel Jones tanked in the rankings for this reason, because he opens the season not only this week, but he's got very difficult matchups over this first month. So especially if the 2 names I just mentioned, you have Matt Ryan, he's probably not on free agency, but Goff's on free agency in a ton of leagues. If you see that, I'd be fine just dropping Daniel Jones and grabbing Goff, because I don't think he's going to produce well this week. I don't think he's going to do great over this next month, and you're probably going to bench him a few times, or you're going to drop him at some point. So I would just make sure, at least this week, try and find a better option on free agency. Another quarterback I'd kind of do the same thing for is Baker Mayfield. Now, Baker gets a road matchup with the Ravens this week, and the Browns are only projected to score 20.25 points. Following the Marcus Peters trade last season, the Ravens held their opponents to just 14.2 points per game. And in their Week 16 matchups, the Ravens were able to hold Baker Mayfield to just 192 passing yards, which tied for his second lowest mark on the season. So add in the fact that Baker typically doesn't do very much in the rushing department. He'll have a few games, maybe like 2, 3, 4 games where he's got like 20 or 30 rushing yards. But in general, he's adding maybe a point rushing. And so it's pretty easy to see the floor here, right? It's a low total. We know this Ravens defense is very good. He performed poorly against them last season. It's the first week of the season, so they might be a little bit rusty. And realistically, where's the ceiling? Because usually when you have a player like this, it's like, yeah, but he could throw for 404 touchdowns, right? Baker had 300 yards and multiple touchdowns one time last season. And he threw 22 touchdowns to 21 interceptions. So for me, if I'm going to start Baker Mayfield, I at least want to see him improve this season and be against an okay defense. It doesn't even have to be a bottom 10 defense, just an average one. But to look at last season and say he didn't perform that great, he showed a very low floor and a pretty low ceiling, and now he starts week 1 against a brutal defense, like a really, really good defense. Why? It doesn't make any sense to me why you'd want to start him. I doubt that many of you own him, so it probably doesn't matter as much. But a lot of people are high on Baker Mayfield this season, and I don't think you should be starting him this week. So let's move on to streaming options next, the good part of the video, since, again, a lot of you should be implementing this strategy. Basically, if you didn't take the top 6 quarterbacks, you should be doing this. So I'm going to give you guys 3 names. Again, they're all owned in less than 30% of leagues. And honestly, I think this list, everyone's owned in less than 20% of leagues. So you should be able to find someone. The first one we'll go over is Minshew versus the Colts. He's owned in just 15.7% of ESPN leagues, which is probably about 30% too low. Not only are the Jaguars expected to lean pass heavy this season, but Minshew is a lot more mobile than people think. He averaged 24.6 rushing yards per game last season, which is just 3 yards per game lower than Deshaun Watson had on the season. He takes on a Colts defense that he pretty much lit up for 295 yards and 3 touchdowns in week 16 last year, and that was with Chark extremely limited due to his ankle injury. The one downside here is that the Jags are 8-point underdogs, and they're only projected to score 18.75 points, and that's tied for Washington with the 3rd lowest on the week. The benefit there is that we know it's all going to come through the air, right? I mean, this team is not going to be getting anything going on the ground unless Ogunbowale and Robinson come out there and just light it up and just are so much better than we expect. It is very likely that Minshew is going to have to throw the ball a ton. So even though they are underdogs, they have a pretty low total, we know that most of their production is going to come through the air, and so that benefits Minshew. And then also, of course, we talked about his rushing upside. He's going to have 20, 30, 40 rushing yards, and that's going to provide a stable floor. One other potential risk, I just want to bring up the risk with these guys, is like I said, 8-point underdogs. And this is against a Colts team that wants to run the ball. And so if the Colts get up 10, 14, 17 points at any point, then, it's not like the Jaguars have a good run defense. So they're going to try and just run the clock out. They're going to say, we're up 17. We've got 2 really good running backs, a great offensive line, and they stink at stopping the run. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to try and run the ball, and that can shorten the game. But ultimately, even if that happens, I do expect pretty much from that point on, Minshew's going to be throwing it like every play. And I think that the Colts have a good defense, but not just like one that we're shying away from. So I think that Minshew can absolutely have a good week. If Minshew's taken, then I would start looking at Teddy Bridgewater. Bridgewater takes on a fairly average Raiders defense, but the appeal here comes from his weapons. McCaffrey, Moore, Samuel, Anderson, Thomas. That's an underrated group, and they're all really good after the catch. So some people might be concerned that Bridgewater is going to have a very low ADOT this season. It's just going to happen. That's who he is. He's not going to chuck the ball deep every play. But that doesn't matter as much if his players have a very high yards after the catch. So if he had a very low ADOT and all of his weapons, caught the ball and basically fell down, right? Like they just did nothing after the catch. We can't use him because he's not going to have blow-up weeks. But given that basically everyone on this offense can excel after the catch, can take, 5-yard slants to the house, that's going to benefit him. And it means he's going to have some really nice weeks. This game is projected to stay fairly close. We've got a 3-point spread right now. It's fluctuated, I believe, between 2.5 and 3.5. So somewhere around 3. And it's got a decent total. So there's absolutely a chance that this game turns into a shootout. I say that the odds are a little bit less than the games we talked about at the beginning with the Falcons and the Seahawks, and then the Rams and the Cowboys. I think those games are more likely to shoot out than this one, but it's certainly possible. Now, one thing with him, I don't expect Teddy to do a whole lot with his legs. So we talked about Minshew. Minshew's going to have a really nice rushing floor. That's not going to be a thing with Teddy. But Teddy has more talent to work with. So I would expect him to have a higher passing ceiling because of that. Ultimately, I'd expect Teddy to finish somewhere in that like 16 to 18 point range. I'd be a little bit surprised if he made it up to 25 unless he got pretty lucky with the passing touchdowns. But I'd also be surprised if he finished much lower than 16 unless, McCaffrey runs in 3 touchdowns. So I think unless we get everything passing or everything rushing, I think somewhere in that 16 to 18 range is viable. And I think that can be, a solid performance for someone you're getting for free. If both Minshew and Teddy are on a team, then I can assure you Tyrod Taylor is not. He's only owned in 3.6% of leagues, and he's got a really nice week 1 matchup. He takes on a Bengals defense that allowed the most rushing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks last season, while also allowing the second most yards per play. The Bengals do not have a good defense, okay? And the Chargers do. So while I expect Burrow to move the ball, there's a lot of unknowns with him. And it's possible that he struggles in his first game. And if Burrow struggles, then that could create a lot of short fields for Taylor. So maybe, the total passing numbers don't reach 350, right? Don't be expecting that, okay? But if he has some short fields and he can get some quick touchdowns, could he throw for 225 yards and 3 touchdowns while adding 40 rushing yards on the ground? Absolutely. And the Chargers are projected to score a solid 23 points. That's not bad. And he's got plenty of weapons as well. He's got Keenan Allen, and he's got Hunter Henry and Austin Eckler. So maybe even Mike Williams. Honestly, every other day is a different report. One day it's like probably missing all of September. Next it's, well, he might play in week 1. So just wait. Just wait until we get some sort of confirmation for him. But if he's playing, then that's just another benefit for Tyrod Taylor. But I don't think that you need him to play. So if you see that Mike Williams is out, don't just be like, oh no, can't play Tyrod, right? You'll still be fine with Tyrod. It's not the end of the world if he doesn't end up suiting up. So the streamers for week 1, Minshew, then Bridgewater, then Tyrod Taylor. And I'll keep track of how many they score on average. And we will keep track throughout the entire season, see if we can get some low-end quarterback 1 production. So those are some quarterbacks that I'd be starting and avoiding in week 1, as well as the top streaming options for this week. If I didn't answer your question in this video, then I'm sure it can be answered by looking at my rankings on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? But thanks for watching.